World Insight coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, Canada recently announced it plans to join the AIIB. We speak with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to discuss Canada's AIIB membership as well as China-Canada relations. We also hold an exclusive interview with Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi to discuss China-Italy ties, Italy's position in Europe, and Italy's domestic reforms.
During this
and we speak with South Africa's President Jacob Zuma to find out how the only African country in the G20 group can contribute to sustainable, inclusive global economic growth. The G20 summit in Hangzhou brought together leaders from some of the most important economies of the world. They share common aspirations for inclusive growth and development, but at the same time face their own unique set of challenges. I sit down with a few G20 leaders in Hangzhou to get a closer understanding of the issues that concern them most. I met with Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, and one of the youngest state leaders at this year's G20 summit. Trudeau says Canada's government is looking for new opportunities around the world, evidenced by its decision to join the AIIB, while Canadian society is grappling with big ideas at home, ranging from gender equity to youth participation in civil society. Youngest state leader, youngest national leader, what is it like? What kind of plan do you have for your country?
Well, I think one of the things that is exciting for me is I do feel part of a new generation of leaders that are drawing on a new generation of citizen voices. We have young people who are stepping up, being more interested in the world, taking strong stands on things like equality and diversity, and interested in traveling the world and being part of it. And I feel like I'm part of a generation that is reflecting those values.
What is going on with the AIIB? In fact, your country, Canada, has applied for AIIB. How does that work, and why it becomes the first North American country?
Well, Canada has already a strong presence in building infrastructure in China, whether it's housing or nuclear plants or trains. Canada is building high-quality infrastructure in China, across Asia, around the world. So we come with a significant amount of expertise. But being able to join in this excellent initiative of the AIIB that China is leading on, that is going to create opportunities not just for citizens in China, but for citizens across Asia to get access to good infrastructure. I mean, we know investments in infrastructure create good jobs in the short term, but lead to productivity gains and growth in the long term. And that's something that's really important.
And you're, of course, going on with the Canadian tradition of having very good relations with China. But tell me about this relation. Even though the countries are good trade partners with one another, the trade volume is still slow.
Indeed. There's a lot of work to do. I think not just the economic opportunity. I mean, we signed a deal with Alibaba for a brand new Canada Pavilion, which I hope is going to give access to the hundreds of millions of middle class in China, great quality Canadian products, but also understanding that the ties that go beyond economics, people to people, tourism ties, the families that have family members on either side, the cultural ties. There is so much that we can draw on from each other, so much we can challenge ourselves with each other to grow and to improve, that I'm excited about it.
What do you think China and Canada can do together? And now you're joining the G20 summit. How would you judge whether the summit is a successful one or not?
Well, first of all, I think it's a great success that China is hosting the G20. When Canada was very involved in creating the G20 back in the 1990s, one of the reasons for the fact that we needed a G20 and not just a G7 and others was because we had to have China involved in the discussions around the global economy. So this is a great thing. And the fact that the priorities that President Xi has put forward around inclusive growth, around innovation, around investment in the future, around opportunities for everyone, these are things that are deeply important to Canada as well. So I'm very pleased ways that we're going to be able to amplify that message, that you can't cut your way to growth. You have to believe in the future and invest in the future. You have to create the kind of world in which people will have chances to succeed. And what China has been able to do over the past few decades of lifting 700 million people out of poverty, of adding 300 million people to the global middle class, I mean, this is extraordinary. But there's always more work to do, and there's always challenges that come with that. And how we get together and share our solutions and challenge each other and grow through close relationships, well, that's what the world is supposed to have more of, and that's what the G20 is all about.
He's playful. He can balance a baby with one hand. He's a great dancer and a boxer. He's 45-year-old Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the second youngest to ever hold the office. Trudeau has been involved in politics since 2008. He won the leadership of the Liberal Party in April 2013 and went on to lead his party to victory in the 2015 federal election. The third-placed Liberals moved from 36 seats to 184 seats, which is the largest ever numerical increase by a party in a Canadian election. Polls keep showing high support for Trudeau since he was sworn into office about 10 months ago, and he's grabbed headlines with his bold views on many issues, from feminism to climate change.
Canada is back.
Forbes ranks Trudeau as the 69th most powerful person in the world, and Time included him in their list of the 100 most influential people in the world.
Mr. Prime Minister, this is already your fourth time, and this is the first time as Prime Minister. But tell me about the last 3 times when we were in China, because those were very interesting experiences.
Yeah, my first visit, I was just a little older than my daughter is now, who I'm traveling with on this trip. I was with my father when he was Prime Minister, and we were received in Beijing to huge banquets, and it was a wonderful opportunity. Then I came back a few years later with him when he had finished politics, and I was just, we were traveling as tourists, but my father, of course, was regarded as a respected elder and given wonderful welcome and support everywhere we went. And then when I was in my mid-20s, I came back backpacking, just on my own with a couple of friends.
Where did you go?
Well, we came into Beijing by traveling from train from Moscow, and then we worked our way down. We went to Hangzhou, we went to Taishan, we went to all sorts of beautiful places. When we got to Shanghai, we were challenged because we were traveling around New Year's, and everyone was traveling to see their families, so all the trains were booked, all the planes were booked. We ended up having to take a slow boat from Shanghai to Guangzhou in Hong Kong. It was a wonderful trip.
You got a real taste of China. 1.4 billion people over there. And of course, you have graduated from just a backpacker to the Prime Minister. When people look at your political track record, they're extremely impressed by your way of promoting the youth, and also your way of gearing up enthusiasm among the youth about politics. How did that work? What is your secretive remedy?
Well, I think the first thing is young people get a bad reputation for being disconnected or cynical or not caring about politics, when the fact is, what I find is young people care deeply about their communities, about their future. They just get frustrated when they don't have ways of making their voices heard or ways of being part of shaping their community's future or their country and their world's future. So what I really realized was drawing young people into the political process was a powerful way of getting them to feel connected with their country and contribute to it. But it's also a really important way, particularly in places like Canada, where the pace of political change and navel-gazing, looking inwards, is so tempting. It challenges you to take a more long-term view. You have to, if you're listening and talking to young people, you have to think about the future 20, 30, 50 years in the future. And I think bringing a more long-term vision to Western democracies is something I'm glad to do.
But there are a lot of cynical views about what the futures might be, as you have just illustrated, Mr. Prime Minister. And now that's why there's so much populism. There's so much anti-globalization. There's cynicism about politics worldwide. What do you make of this trend? Is it like to continue? with leaders like you, is that really like to change the picture?
Well, I think we have to recognize the reality first. The reality is there's a lot of people around the world who are worried that globalization, that trade, that economic growth hasn't been working for them. The middle class in a lot of countries, like Canada and other Western countries, has sort of flatlined, and there isn't a sense of growth there. So there's frustration. And when you get worried and frustrated, cynical politicians can try and exploit the fear and the anger, and then you get Brexit, and you get negative fears about the international community as a way of gaining power. What I think leadership needs to be, and what I'm trying to do, is you recognize people's worries and anxieties, and then you point out that no, we can create inclusive growth. We can create opportunities for the middle class and those working hard to join it. Trade brings jobs and opportunities. The new Canada Pavilion in Alibaba is going to give opportunities for small businesses across the country to sell great products to China. Trade can be very good. We just have to make that positive argument, and I think that's what people want
Arguments
to
could be easy to make, and yet when it comes to real actions and real beliefs, it could be very challenging, particularly when you have politics that has been in gridlocks for quite some time.
Yes, but at the same time, I mean, we're facing similar challenges on economic growth in Canada that elsewhere are, even more a little bit because we were so reliant on natural resources and oil prices, for example. But that's where knowing that we have to invest in innovation, in education, in infrastructure, in opportunities for people to succeed there are investments you have to make in the short term that don't necessarily give payoffs right away, but that are setting us on the right track. And if you demonstrate the right kind of leadership, people are willing to say, yes, we're going in the right direction and we're confident about the future, and that's what I'm building on.
Mr. Prime Minister, another thing about you many are extremely interested in is why you claim yourself to be a feminist.
Well, I think that's more of a recognition and a reflection of the reality of how young people see the world right now. To be a feminist, you just have to recognize that women should have the same opportunities as men, and that there's still a lot of work to do to get there. If you can say yes to both those things, well, congratulations, you're a feminist. And for me, it's important for men.
You're not afraid of that title. You're extremely proud of it.
No, I'm extremely proud of it, and I think more men should be open about saying they're feminists, because it's not just about women saying we need more opportunities. It should be smart men saying, yes, women need more opportunities. I had a great conversation with Jack Ma just yesterday about the importance of getting more women into the workforce, getting more women into positions of leadership. Not because it's just a moral or right thing to do, but because it's better for success, to have multiple points of view. It's better for growth. It's better for everyone.
That's true. What it would be like when your daughter, in the age when you were first traveled to China, would be for her when she grows up?
For me, a lot of people say, oh, it must be so hard to be a young father while you're a politician because you're traveling so much, I work so hard. And I say, yes, but I'm not in politics in spite of the fact that I have kids. I'm in politics because I have kids, because I know that I can do things that will make her world and all young people's world better by taking the right decisions.
You are probably the youngest state leader among all the G20 economies, I guess, this time attending the summit, when it comes to age, but not necessarily political experiences.
You're very kind.
What does it take for politicians, do you think, to be successful, to be convincing, to be able to interact with the real people?
Well, one of the challenges of politics is it gets very, very easy to get closed off from ordinary citizens, to be surrounded by very smart people who give you solutions, and you find yourself cut off from everyday people and the challenges they live every day. You think about politics all the time. No ordinary person thinks about politics all the time. They think about their jobs, they think about their family, they think about... So for me, staying connected with people by having regular conversations, by using social media, by being open to walking down the street as much as you can.
Yeah, I saw your photo. First year when you were attending the UN conference, you were doing a yoga pose on the table. Of course, there are so many people talking about that, but what kind of message do you really want to convey through those? And also holding all those little panda cups in a way.
I think one of the things that is important about leadership is that you be authentic, that you be real, that you be the person you are. I am someone who, I love to do physical things. I love to, meet people. I love to connect. I love animals. And for me to share who I am with the people that I have the responsibility to serve, so they feel that they know me and they know my priorities, keeps me closer to them and keeps me better able to understand what they need in terms of leadership.
So are we going to have more fun photos in the future?
I certainly hope so, because I'd hate to suddenly become boring and disconnected.
That's the least thing you are. Mr. Prime Minister, it's such a pleasure to have you. All the best.
Thank you
so
very
much.
Appreciate it.
Well, that's Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, in an exclusive interview with us at the G20 Summit in Hangzhou. Stay with us here on World Insight. Coming up in our next segment, we hold an exclusive interview with Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi to discuss China-Italy ties, Italy's position in Europe, and Italy's domestic reforms. And we also speak with South Africa's President Jacob Zuma to find out how the only African country in the G20 group can contribute to sustainable, inclusive global economic growth. If you look for a fresh face with bold and new ideas at the G20 summit, the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi was the perfect interviewee. In an exclusive interview, he not only illustrated his administration's desire to work with China to promote the One Belt, One Road initiative, but also his personal determination to break political deadlock back in Rome. One can only imagine the difficulties that lay ahead. Let's take a listen to our discussion. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome to CCTV News.
Good morning. I'm really happy to be here with you.
There are interesting ideas popping up all the time, including OBOR, One Belt, One Road. Italy has been a country from the very beginning, actively listening and even willing to participate. But how, Mr. Prime Minister? Action plans? Implementation plans?
I think we have a lot of possibilities if we follow One Belt, One Road. But in my mind, the priority is the decision achieved by Italian government to change the harbor and port regulation. This is very, very, very great opportunity. Why? Because Italy is a land of sea, and the conclusion of road from China to Europe could be exactly the Italian harbor, Italian ports. The real priority in this moment is decide the common investments, but today it's possible to consider One Belt, One Road a great opportunity, exactly, particularly, especially in this way. At the same time, I think we have a common goal, 2020, the last year of 13 program of Chinese government, and at the same time the 50th anniversary of relation between Italy and China. So 2020 could become a very great moment to show the concrete results of One Belt, One Road in Italy.
The relationship between you and the Chinese leaders have been upgrading all the time. I see you coming to this country to visit. You're coming next year for another state visit with the invitation of the Chinese president. What do you think these kinds of interactions among leadership of both countries, the chemistry being created, might be able to help the two countries when it comes to policy making and also future interactions and innovation?
This relation is absolutely crucial for create a new approach, because the world is totally different in respect to the past. Totally different. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the relation between countries are particularly difficult. Now is a totally different world. We are totally interconnected. Globalization is the normal life of day by day. So create a more efficient relation between the leaders' summit, leaders' bilateral meeting is absolutely a priority. But we have not only this point as priority as Italian government with the Chinese government, because next year Italy will lead the G7 community. Yes. So I think I'm really interested to understand the conclusion of Hangzhou summit, also to create an agenda. My priority is combine together culture and education with economy, because this is one of the most important assets of Italy. Also, against the problem of security, of terrorism. We invest a lot of money in security, but we have to invest the same money in culture, education, theater, museum, sports, football, because we have to give a message to our population, combine together at this point. So next year we will have the G7 in Italy after G20 in China. The President of the Republic of Italy, Sergio Mattarella, will be here for a state visit next in the first months of 2017. Myself, I come back in China for the third time in 3 years next year. So we work together with great determination, with a lot of friendship, and I'm confident about the great opportunities of our cooperation. Obviously, I wait President Xi Jinping in Italy, and obviously in my incredible city, Florence.
Located in southern Europe, Italy is one of the most alluring destinations for travelers from around the world. And with Britain soon to exit the EU, Italy will shortly become a bigger player in the bloc. The country's own moment of reckoning is nigh, with a referendum on constitutional reform likely to go ahead this autumn. The reform is sponsored by Prime Minister Matteo Renzi and aimed at reducing fragmentation in Italian politics. The idea is to increase executive stability and the efficiency of the whole system. But Renzi has staked his political future on the outcome. He says he will resign if the vote goes against him. Either way, Italy will be in a position to wield influence over the EU's future direction.
Mr. Prime Minister, you are innovative, some say, in politics, not only in your internal politics, to change your politics, but also in the inter-country relations on the European continent. Many pointed out your interactions with Germany and also your conversations and encounters with Chancellor Merkel. Many say, what kinds of role does this Prime Minister in Italy wants his country to have? And how is that related to the ever-rising roles of some of the other countries, such as Germany? Help us to paint a picture of Europe, Mr. Prime Minister, that you have in your mind.
My view is the same. I believe Europe was an incredible gift by our fathers and our grandfathers. Europe gave us 70 years of peace, of prosperity, after centuries of civil war in our continent. So, really, Europe is one of the most great opportunities for the new generations. But at the same time, in the last period, Europe lost a lot of attractiveness, of dynamism, and we have to necessity to give a message of energy, of innovation. This is the role of new leaders in Europe. Germany is the most important country as a number of citizens, as a level of economy, but also German leaders knows it's not enough. Germany alone is not enough. Germany is able to lead a lot of economic fields because 15 years ago, Germany's leaders decided to invest in the future. Just to make one example, Germany's leaders changed labor market legislation in 2003. My government was forced to change labor market in 2014 because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we lost the momentum, we lost the time to change labor market. And if we change now labor market, the reaction arrive in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So Germany today is the leader, but Germany needs the support of all the countries. And the first to understand this very important statement is exactly Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, because the Chancellor knows the importance of cooperation and support to other people with Germany. My idea is that try to persuade everyone, particularly Chancellor Merkel and the President Hollande, to work together, to give a message of tomorrow, to push in direction of the future. And just 10 days ago, I hosted them in a very little island called Ventotene. Yeah. In this island, in 1941, 3 people arrested by Nazis and fascists decided to write a very important document, a very important manifesto for the United States of Europe. During the war, it's an incredible message of vision. So I hosted Angela Merkel and François Hollande in Ventotene to give the same message. We can push in direction of the future if we choose the ideals and not only simply the bureaucracy. This is the challenge today for Europe.
Right. Europe now these days faces so much challenges. We all know Brexit. We do not know yet its impact. There's also the migrant crisis, and you got Middle East in a way being turned all side down. So what would that mean for Europe? Meanwhile, you've got economies in Europe suffering to a certain extent for quite a long time. And as you said, gridlock in politics in many European countries. What would this mean for Europe? What would that mean for something like the EU? Are you still confident about it?
I think Brexit could become the most great opportunity for Europe. I'm sad for the decision of our friends, our British friends, but when the people vote for leave, the people vote for leave, point. That's. So this means Brexit have to be really a Brexit, so an exit by UK from EU. And at the same time, EU could become a place more attractive, more dynamic, more energetic, but we need an attention more focused on growth and not on austerity, on investments and not on bureaucracy, on politics and not on technocrats. This is the challenge. We can use Brexit to give new energy to Europe, but we have to change the approach. More attention about growth and less than austerity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. I hope there will be more breaths of fresh air for today's politics. Really appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister.
Bye-bye.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, a reform-minded politician, daring to break political deadlock to push his way forward for changes to happen in his country. Stay with us on World Insight. Coming up in our final segment, in an exclusive interview, we speak with South Africa's President Jacob Zuma to find out how the only African country in the G20 group can contribute to a sustainable, inclusive global growth. During the G20 summit, the voice of Africa has been loud and clear. China, as the host of the summit this year, committed itself to have voices and input from developing countries and emerging economies. South Africa is a member of the BRICS and also the only African country among the G20 economies. President Jacob Zuma, right before he's leaving China, gave us an exclusive in which I asked him about Africa's role in implementing the inclusive growth and development agenda reached at the G20 summit in Hangzhou, and his country's evolution in politics and the responsibilities of a political leader in that regard. During this year's G20 summit, Chinese president has made very clear at the very beginning that Africa will be one of the focal points. But it also depends on the other 19 economies of the G20, whether that will be the case and whether there will be concrete results.
Of course, President Xi Jinping made that point very clear, loud and clear. And nobody opposed that proposal. So everybody accepted that proposal, partly because they know the position of Africa, where Africa comes from. They also know the challenges of Africa. And therefore it is accepted that there must be a specific approach that is given to Africa.
And during this process, Mr. President, what should be Africa's role? Because you are the only African leader that is present there at the G20 economies. So what should be and could be and will be Africa's role?
Well, Africa, firstly, Africa has a particular history. Africa, I think, of all the regions of the world, was the only one which was totally colonized and stayed, therefore, for a long time without Africa doing its own things. When the countries from Europe were actually suppressing them for many years. I think it was only in the decade of the 60s that they began to get their independence. So whilst other countries were moving, they were, in a sense, trapped in the colonial situation. And they had to get a phase where they were fighting for their liberation. But also, the colonialists had come to occupy and dominate their resources, so to speak. So whatever Africa is trying to do now is coming up from a very heavy kind of suppression. And therefore, Africa is lagging behind. But Africa is saying it's a region that is emerging, that is now for the first time is trying to come together so that they have a collective kind of an approach as a region, and therefore it sees its future. And of course, South Africa, as one of the big economies in the continent, is a member of a G20. And South Africa does not represent itself only. It represents the continent. And therefore it speaks on behalf of the continent, whilst it is speaking also on its own behalf.
Infrastructure project usually takes a lot of cash. I understand there has been establishment of the BRICS New Development Bank. It has been running for 1 year. Even the South African has now become the vice head of that organization. And also the AIIB, which has just started with their first board meeting, global board meeting. What do you think, Mr. President? Will these two entities provide your country with more alternatives, even the African continent?
The continent had taken a very deliberate decision to establish infrastructure that is going to connect the entire continent. And heads of states are actually leading that kind of, there's a committee that is leading that kind of infrastructure to ensure that infrastructure is there. So, but also, the question of funding will always be a challenge. So the emergence of the BRICS Bank has been one of the most important kind of happening in our society, because BRICS Bank is different from other big banks that would have stringent conditions, what to do, and therefore Africa and South Africa, all of us, are looking at the BRICS Bank as the bank that is going to make things easier. And the BRICS itself has that understanding that Africa, that's why, whilst the headquarters of the bank are here in China and Shanghai, but a regional BRICS Bank is going to be in Africa, in South Africa.
It's an African center of the BRICS banks. But what is like to be the role of this African center?
It is actually, one of its main role will be to fund the infrastructure in Africa. That's what it's going to do. Already, there are projects that have been submitted to the bank here that now need to be looked at so that they can continue. So the emergence of the BRICS Bank has been a step forward for us.
President Zuma, industrialization of the African countries have been quite a debate, shall I say, over the past few years.
Yes.
But how? How to do industrialization it has its positive connotations, sometimes it has its negative connotations. So what do you think is the approach that African countries, including yours, should adopt in order to have industrialization?
Well, there are many things that we need to do. The question of industrialization in our continent has one side only, does not have a negative
Really?
side.
Okay, tell us about it.
Why? Because we've never been industrialized in the past. Industrialization waves that have come and gone, Africa was not touched. And other countries industrialized. It's for the first time that we are industrializing. Because colonialists were not there to industrialize Africa. But in South Africa, you have a different kind of a situation, wherein there was industrialization, but not by the indigenous people, the majority, by those who came to settle. Now what we are saying that the black people themselves must create the industry. So for the first time, we are creating middle class, we are creating people who are going to own businesses for the first time. So it can't have a negative side, positive side all the time. We are going to create jobs. We are, for example, training our people, skilling them for the purposes of industrialization with us. So that's what we're looking at. Part of what President Jinping was saying, to focus on the continent, is actually to support, among others, industrialization itself.
Talking about industrialization, people look at China. Whether it's a China model or not, that's for debate. But certainly the China experience, what does that mean to you, Mr. President, and also other African nations?
What is critical with China is that the openness, much as they say so, but they are doing business as business, but guided by the Chinese characteristics. But what is important is that that in itself is a lesson to other people. How have the Chinese succeeded? It's because they've got discipline in the job they do. That's what people have got to adopt. I've said it to many people. You can wish to be Chinese, you'll never be, because you have got to have what guides them as the ideological approach, so to speak. But they are not, it's not say you cannot do it.
Known as Africa's most industrialized economy, South Africa regained the title of the continent's largest economy from Nigeria in August. Unlike Nigeria, which relies heavily on its oil exports, South Africa's economy is much more diverse. From a thriving manufacturing industry to a booming services sector, the country accounts for 24% of the continent's gross domestic product. Despite that, South Africa still faces the risk of recession, with its economy contracting in the first quarter of 2016. And politically, the country is moving to a new juncture. In its recent local elections, the ruling African National Congress had to share some of its power with opposition Democratic Alliance. That comes as a first since the end of apartheid in 1994. And some say this may reflect a change in South Africa's political landscape and future.
What do you make of these dramatic changes when it comes to the demands of qualities of political leadership?
Well, South Africa is a democratic country. It's just 20 years. The experience is very clear. Any former national liberation movement, in 20 years, there are challenges politically that challenge the political party. What becomes important, how is that party responding to those challenges? That is important. I don't think the ANC is different from other former political parties. What is important is that the party must understand what is happening and it must say, what do we do to deal with this? For an example, 20 years in South Africa, it means democracy has matured and people generally are beginning to make the choices having thought in one form or the other, and it means, for an example, for the first time in South Africa, we've just gone through the local government elections, wherein people have made their choices, and we had 3 metros at the big waterfall that we were tying for the first time. And then there's been an introduction of a new element of coalitions. because there's no one party
Right.
could rule without talking to small parties. So that's a new element that has come in, that even small parties can now determine which direction a metro goes or a municipality goes. That's a new kind of politics.
But what does that mean for the used to be major party?
It used to be a major party. It means we have reached a point where the democracy is now taking another kind of turn. The ANC then has to say, how do we handle this situation as a big party in the question of coalitions? We must now begin to plan and factor in the issue of coalitions when we go for elections.
Right.
Because that's what it is all about. And this is the maturing of democracy. And that's what it is. If you look at old democracies, they don't have too many parties because they've been there for a while and parties have been sort of shrinking into either 2 or 3.
Right.
So it's a process of democratic process that we are now 20 years, and therefore the politics,
Right.
if you talk about winning elections, are beginning to introduce a coalition factor, which has not been the factor before.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your trust and your confidence, Mr. President.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is Jacob Zuma, the South African president, talking to us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insight from across China and around the world. Have a great night.